Excuse me, ma'am. Sorry to wake you, but what's your opinion on sideboards in Lorcana? Any thoughts on that? Oh, okay. Sorry. Geez, you don't want them. My bad. Sir. Any thoughts about sideboards in Lorcana? Sir, can I get a word, please? Any thoughts about sideboards in Lorcana, sir? Any thoughts? Any thoughts? Why are you avoiding my question? Why are you avoiding my question, sir? I just want to know about sideboards in Lorcana. I don't know what's... Just can you give me a straight answer, please? Can you give me... Oh, okay. Oh, you feel really strongly about this. What's up, Illumineers? Welcome back to another Lorcana discussion video here on Inkspot Games. I'm Matt, and boy am I excited to talk about this topic here. As you can see on Twitter, I made a post early this morning, the morning of recording this, that reads, I think it's apparent that sideboarding is a must in Lorcana. It'll open up deck building in a huge way and will limit power creep. So much more depth would be added to the game from a competitive standpoint. And as you can see, this tweet actually caught some attention and started quite a dialogue about whether we should have a sideboard in Lorcana or whether we shouldn't. And as you can see, I made a pretty hard stance on this. So instead of making a video of just me talking about why we should have one, I wanted to get the community involved also and show what they had to say too, because some people did make some points that kind of reeled me back in from this hard stance and gave a different way of viewing things for the card game and the concept of sideboarding. But before we get into it, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, share with your friends, all that good stuff. We have Lorcana discussion videos quite often, gameplay, deck of the week, looking forward to future sets, cards, all that good stuff. So if you like Lorcana content, this is the place for you. So be sure to like, subscribe, and thank you so much for those who do. So before we really get into it here, let me explain exactly what a sideboard is for those who don't really know or understand what it is, or for those who are new to card games and never had to really deal with this before. So a sideboard is basically cards that you would swap in your deck in a more competitive best of three match format that would help against specific matchups. Like, for example, if you're playing an opponent that has an item heavy deck, you would want to swap in with a card that's in your main deck, a card like anything that removes items, right? There are cards that you can bring to a game and can almost fix your deck on the fly to have a better matchup with whatever your opponent is playing. A lot of different card games have this. In Yu-Gi-Oh! It's called the side deck. They have it in Magic the Gathering and other games as well. So this isn't like some new concept, but right now in Lorcana, sideboarding isn't really a thing. You know, you kind of have to build your deck based on what the meta demands and make certain decisions on what you need to add in your deck to counter certain things. My whole stance on sideboarding, right, is that we're going to get to a point in Lorcana where, like, power creep is going to be a thing, right? And we're already kind of seeing that. I don't think it's as notorious as some people do. Like, I've seen tweets of people, like, flat out quitting the game because of it. I don't think it's that bad. But cards are going to start being power crept out of the game, and deck building will become a little more challenging. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think deck building being a challenge is inherently bad. I don't think that at all. I just think having a sideboard can open up certain possibilities and make cards that might not see as much play right now with no sideboarding, those cards become more relevant. So, like, you know, maybe certain cards from the first chapter or Rise of the Floodborn, instead of them just going into obscurity, you're actually able to play them and tech them in against certain matchups. You know, and obviously with sanctioned competitive play coming this year, we might be seeing that, who knows, and we're gonna get a more clear idea of what these formats look like, and these tournaments start to become real. As we know, right now, again, there's no sanctioned play, but it's pretty obvious what the best deck is, and that's Ruby Amethyst. And there's really no way to side cards into combat that. Obviously, you can build your deck around that, which you should be doing anyway, even if you do have a sideboard. But I think it would add so much more depth to the game. It would change deck building philosophies and deck building decisions. And, you know, when you're using a sideboard, you're not just throwing the card in your deck. You need to swap it out with another card, right? So there's also the aspect of choosing which cards to side in, which cards to side out. You can still build your deck based around certain things, certain matchups, but I think adding a sideboard will only increase the depth of the game and can also add more creative decision making. I know some people disagree with that, but that's kind of just how I feel. It is worth noting that I do come from a Yu-Gi-Oh background. I play Yu-Gi-Oh competitively, and the sideboard or the side deck has always been the thing, and it's really, really important in Yu-Gi-Oh. And obviously it can be important in Magic the Gathering too. So I think it would do Lorcana good. Again, as we get more sets in the future, strategies are going to become more concentrated, meaning that we're not really going to have like this sort of good stuff format where you're getting 2 colors and the best cards in those colors and you just kind of go to town. Like we're even seeing in reveals from Into the Inklands, like more concentrated strategies where your deck building needs to be more on point, and you kind of want to have like your own sort of win condition, not just I put together the best cards and win. Once these strategies become more concentrated like that, that's where I think the sideboard is going to be important, because you should be able to have a chance to counter that. And on the flip side, your opponent should be able to have a chance to counter you. I will say though, based on some of these responses, that I do see both sides. I'm the kind of person who kind of likes to take a stance with something and stick with it. And, you know, if I had to choose one, then yes, I would choose have a sideboard in Lorcana. I just think it would do good for the game. But as we're about to see, not everyone necessarily agrees with that. As we can see right here, I put up a poll earlier today, and it's pretty split. Almost 50-50 between yes or no. So I know there's not like a ton of votes, but based on responses I've gotten based on this poll, people are pretty split on this thing. And like I said, some people might say no because like they've never had to deal with sideboarding and it's just another aspect of the game that they don't want to have to deal with. But other people said no because people think that just based on how Lorcana is designed, it doesn't really need it, based on its resource management system and things like that. And there are certain things I agree with. And obviously there's people who stand more with where I'm at, where I think a sideboard, again, this is so important in competitive best of 3 formats. Obviously, like on the kitchen table, it doesn't really matter. But in these sanctioned competitive events, I just think it's very, very important. But let's take a look and see what other people had to say about this topic. Lorcana Goon says, 100% agree. I think it adds a way bigger layer to deck building and overall best of 3 format. I also think it adds value to usually worthless cards like Fang Crossbow or Poison Apple. A lot of people seem to disagree though, mainly because they compare it to Pokemon or Magic the Gathering or even Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah, and this is kind of where I'm at. And again, it's hard because like you look at other games and the side deck, sure, might be problematic in those games, but like I can't imagine playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Without a sideboard at this point based on how the game is designed. And don't get me wrong, like comparing this to Yu-Gi-Oh! is apples and oranges. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is like the most unique card game out there, and like no other game plays like it, so we really can't compare the two. but even in Magic the Gathering, like, the argument is, you know, does putting in like these silver bullets from your sideboard just to counter another deck, is that good for the game? Does that make the game fun? Does it make it fun? I don't know, honestly, but I think it makes it, I guess, more fair. And I think, like, again, it adds more depth and strategy to it, at least in my opinion. But obviously there are some people who disagree. Traverse Tavern says, I think the main reason I disagree is because it removes deck building costs on cards that are silver bullets to specific card types. I prefer we don't go the Yu-Gi-Oh route of I open my sideboard bullets so I win, which obviously wouldn't happen right away. What else do I think? The deck building in this game is incredibly important because you have to weigh your meta text extremely carefully against consistency pieces. With sideboards, you just run the most consistent version of a deck and then just throw in an extreme hate for specific decks. Now, here's the thing. In principle, I hear what they're saying and I don't necessarily disagree, right? It does kind of take the current deck building theory of Lorcana away and changes it, right? Because what they said is 100% correct. Right now in Lorcana, you need to build your deck in a way that not only does what it wants to do, but you need to kind of figure out what slots you need to put these sort of meta call tech cards in. That's 100% true, and yes, that is a very interesting way of doing it. Now, but the thing is, just because the deck building philosophy changes, I don't think that means it's a bad thing. The game is going to always change, and I'm sure people who disagree like know that, and like I'm not saying they don't know that or anything. The game is always going to change, and deck building philosophy is going to change with it. So adding a sideboard, I think just, yeah, it makes it different, but I don't think different is necessarily a negative thing. You know, building a deck, building a consistent deck that does what it wants to do, I mean, that's what card games want to achieve anyway, right? And I don't think it limits creativity on deck building. I think it gives deck building more room because you don't need to fill in slots with certain tech cards until you're more sure of the matchup. And again, like I said before, the strategy comes into when you're in game 2 or siding into game 2, knowing what your opponent is doing and knowing which cards to put in, meaning you have to also take some of those more consistent cards out anyway, right? It's not like you're just throwing the side deck cards in, you're putting them in at a cost. You're putting them in at a cost of the consistency of your deck, maybe, possibly, depending on what your deck is. Snapquester Mage says, I feel like the inking system is already somewhat of a sideboard. And I would just prefer that more answers be inkable and more threats be uninkable, because I don't think this game needs a sideboard when you play your unneeded cards as a resource. You have to make choices. So here's where I start to soften up a bit on my hard stance. That, again, is a really good point. You know, if these tech cards are inkable, right, and they're not just complete bricks in your hand, then that does make sense because you're able to get use out of them by inking them. And yeah, that is kind of a way making your deck not be able to brick, having your cake and eating it too, having those tech cards, but still being able to use them as ink. The only problem with this is that means you're starting to rely on card design and card design alone. I've played enough TCGs throughout my years to know that sometimes card design is not very good. And I would even argue there might be some Lorcana cards that aren't really designed very good right now. Certainly in games like Yu-Gi-Oh! And definitely in games like Magic the Gathering. So relying on card design alone is a very dangerous game to play. You know, will those tech cards be enough, or will that just kind of weaken your deck? Which again, it's not just about what you're doing. It's not just about what your deck is doing. Obviously, your opponent needs to do the same thing, right? Like, we would all be in the same boat, but I personally would rather have more control of what these techs are and when to use them, if they're inkable or not, instead of 100% depending on that, oh, card design is going to just, you know, fix this and make these cards not bricks, which, you know, I guess you can make the argument that in deck building, like, if they're not inkable, then don't play them, like these tech cards, then, but like, again, that limits the deck building, that limits what cards can be used. And I don't want to see that happen in this game. You know, I think it's more creative to find different meta calls and tech pieces to put in and go against whatever matchup you're going against. And the last kind of response we're going to look for here, and if you want to see like the whole conversation, be sure to follow my Twitter at Inkspot Games, and vote on the poll and all that too. But Fui says, I agree with you. Ruby Amethyst may be the best deck in the format, match 1 or game 1, but how would it fare after a sideboard? Not really sure what the complaint is against it. I'd rather have my 60 best cards and not have to include cards that are only good 50% of the time. And the example they put is Fidget. Exactly. That's kind of how I feel. And like, because when you're doing that, you're almost kind of gatekeeping cards out of the game. Which, like, yeah, weak cards are going to be gate-kept out of the game anyway, but I mean good cards. I mean, like, the replayability of older sets. And I kind of got this idea because I saw someone on Twitter say that they're quitting the game because the power creep is obnoxious. And, like, what's the point of buying into a set that's not going to be useful once a new set comes out? And, like, I kind of half agree with that, but having a sideboard kind of fixes that and gives you more space to use those cards. Look, at the end of the day, you know, I think Lorcana is fun. If they end up not having a sideboard, I won't be like insanely disappointed, because like the point that multiple people have made, it does add an interesting aspect to deck building where you need to decide what tech cards to put in. Use them as ink, don't use them as ink, stuff like that based on the matchup, and all that is fine, and I can live with that. But I just think it'd be better to have options. I just think it'd be better to have options. I'm not saying that like you can have an unlimited side deck with unlimited cards. Like, no, you can limit it to 10 cards, 15 cards side deck, and like really make people choose. I call it side deck, sideboard, side deck, Yu-Gi-Oh brand. You know, I just think having more options in the game makes the games more interesting. And again, your opponent would need the sideboard against you too. So it's this almost like chess match in a way where it's who not only deck builds the best, not only plays the best, but who puts the right cards in, how many of those cards you put in, and how you utilize them. So that's the video. Let me know where you stand on this. Do you think Lorcana should have a sideboard? Do you think it should just stay the way it is and let the kind of card design of the game take control of it and all that? Let me know in the comments. I would love to see what people have to think. Obviously, let's keep it civil. This is something that we can have a good debate over, even if we disagree and all that good stuff. So that's all I got for you today. Please be sure to like the video, subscribe, and Illumineers, I'll see you on the next one. Later.